First of all, I want to say, Arun, thank you so much for taking the time to come speak with us. Normally, every other spring semester, Dr. Gandhi and I teach a class together, and I go through this panic and say, oh, well, what are we going to do? And they need a title and whatnot. And Arun just right off the cuff says, hey, the gift of anger or something. And it's always perfect. And we have undergraduate and graduate students in it, but this time around, because of the pandemic and being online, it just wasn't going to be the same. So we decided to kind of take it slightly differently. But we wanted the students, especially the second year master students and that's graduating seniors who haven't had an opportunity to meet Dr. Gandhi, to at least have one. And this is tonight. And it's just a crying shame. Arun, these are, they're all your people. You love them equally. And it's good that you're going to get a chance to hear something from some of them. But I want to thank Chuck White, our president, and Karen Olmstead, our provost, and Martin Paraboom, our dean, and Vladis Suzuki, our chair, for supporting what the center does. Arun's been with us for 21 of our 29 years. And in that time, we've had a lot of fun together, traveled the world, done some great things, taking students to a variety of places in the Middle East, India, the Caribbean.
It's just a what? What is this?
Can you move, whoever that is? And with that, going there, it's good sometimes to get him here. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be able to do that again in the spring. So what I wanted to do is normally I would just introduce Arun and tell you what I know about him, but this is National Autism Awareness Month. And for anyone who advocates for people, all sorts of different, what would you say? What would you say? I'm trying to think of the right way to say it. People who have autism, it's a great thing. And my son, Nathan, who just happens to be born, is a scout, and he's working on the Peace Messenger project, which I think is fantastic. I think they named this thing.
Hey, Brian, you're breaking up.
Oh. Yeah, it's hard to hear you.
Sorry. So I'm going to have Nathan, who is Arun's godson, introduce Arun, and we'll get the talk going. So you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Dr. Arun Gandhi is the fifth grandson of Mohandas and Kasturba Gandhi, who was born in South Africa and lived in a place called the Phoenix Colony, which was started by his grandfather and then run by his dad. When Arun was a boy, he went to live with his grandparents in an ashram in India. His grandparents taught him a lot, and I know he was very attached to both of them. His grandmother would sneak him sweets, and that might explain part of his great fondness of her. One of the things Arun learned from his grandfather was how to recognize all the different types of violence going on in the work and how many of us contribute to it every day. Another lesson focused on how to turn anger into something good. And from there, Arun was able to better understand it and live a more peaceful, nonviolent life. Like his grandfather and father, Arun is a peace farmer, which is a person who teaches others about nonviolence as a way of life. Given all the bad things going on in the world today, we need more peace farmers. Arun has been a part of my life since I was born. He has taught me many good lessons on how to treat others and how to help people in need. He is a member of my family and my godfather who looks after me when he is far away. Arun just celebrated his birthday last week, so I hope this summer we can go and visit him and have some cake. I hope you have a good time with him tonight and are able to take away some good ideas. Thank you and have a good night, Arun and friends.
Thank you, Nathan. I think that was the best I think that was the best introduction I've had in all these years, Nathan.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. And all good wishes to you. Well, when Brian called me and asked me to speak tonight to all of you, and I chose the subject of how can anger be a gift, as question that has come up very often ever since I wrote the book, The Gift of Anger. And I have come to the conclusion, of course, my grandfather also came to the same conclusion, but through my work over these years, I've come to the conclusion that anger is a very powerful and very strong emotion that we all have. But instead of understanding it and using it effectively, we all end up abusing it. And that is what causes much of the conflicts and violence in our societies everywhere. Grandfather realized this when he started practicing nonviolence in South Africa. And he said this and wrote about this very often when he said that if we want to practice nonviolence, either publicly or within ourselves, within our own individual selves, we have to first learn to control and channel the energy of anger constructively. Because anger, we find, has caused a lot of grief and a lot of violence in societies. In fact, the Harvard University did a study on this subject, and they came to the conclusion that more than 80% of the violence that we experience in our lives, personally or publicly, is generated by anger. And if we can learn to control that and use that energy constructively, we would be able to reduce violence very substantially in our lives. I've been working for many years now in the prison system here in New York State. And across the board, in all the prisons that I have been to, every one of them, every one of the inmates there have said to me that they acted in one moment of madness when they got angry over something, and that has brought them into prison. And the next, basically their whole life is sacrificed because of that one moment. And that happens to all of us. I mean, if we look at it in our lives, every day we get angry over something or the other, and we say things and do things that we regret. The only difference is that those people who are in prison did something very radical, and therefore they are paying the price for it. And people like us, we don't do very radical things, but still, nevertheless, we break up relationships and, create a lot of conflict between friends and relatives and strangers. And all of that comes from anger. And because we are not accustomed to using anger in a constructive way. My grandfather, when I was with him at the age of 12 and living with him, I was very angry young boy because I suffered a lot of prejudices in South Africa as a person of black color. And it filled me with a lot of rage, especially because I was hated as much by the whites as I was hated by the blacks. And it seemed to me that everybody hated everybody there, and there was no humanity and no, brotherhood or relationships with people. And I being a young child and not very proficient in philosophy and so on, I just wanted to fight back again. The only justice I knew about at that stage was eye for an eye justice. And that's when my parents took me to India, and I had the opportunity to live with grandfather. And grandfather explained this to me in very simple terms. He said, anger to the human being is what the trip switch is to the electrical circuit. We have an electrical circuit in our homes, and we have a trip switch which goes off when something goes wrong in the circuit. In the same way, the trip switch of anger within a human being is telling us that there is something wrong here and we need to stop and look at it and take corrective action. But instead of doing that, we abuse that danger signal. And the result is that we create violence in society. So it's important for us to understand this and to learn ways in which we can overcome this and learn to practice or use the energy of anger constructively. One thing that he made me do was to write an anger journal. He said, every time you get angry, don't act on it and don't say anything or do anything that you're going to regret later on. But write a journal. But write the journal with the intention of finding a solution to the problem, and then commit yourself to finding a solution. Now that is very important, because a lot of people today do write an anger journal. But every time they go back and read the journal, they are just reminded of the incident and they get angry all over again, because they simply pour their anger out into the journal. So it's important that we write the journal with the intention of finding a solution, and then commit yourself to finding a solution. And I did this for many years, and I must say that it helped me considerably in learning how to deal with anger constructively and channel that energy for the good of humanity rather than abusing it. To do this, we need to have some control over our minds. And we will find that we have no control over our minds because we have never really trained our minds or never taken control of our minds. It's like the Buddhists say that a human mind is like a crazy monkey jumping from tree to tree. And that's basically what we do. But instead of letting that monkey go crazy and just keep jumping around, we can harness that energy and we can catch that monkey and train that monkey to be under our control and to hold on to doing the right thing. To do this, we are very conscious of our physical health, so we do a lot of physical exercises, but we are not conscious of our mental health, and so we neglect the mental part of the exercises, and we just assume that going to schools and colleges and learning and reading is all that is required. But that is only filling our minds with knowledge. It's not strengthening our minds to come under our control. It's like filling a computer with this software, but if that software is not compatible with the hardware, it's not going to work very well. And so we need to have a mind that is under our control, and we can make our minds do what we want it to do. To do this exercise, I had to sit quietly in a room for a few minutes every day and hold in front of me something that gave me pleasure to look at. It could be a flower, or it could be a photograph, or whatever it is hold that in front of me for 1 minute, focus all my attention on that object for that full minute, and then close my eyes and see how long I could hold that image in my mind. In the beginning, I found that the moment I closed my eyes, the image vanished because there was no training. It's like going to a gym for the first time and trying to lift a 100-pound weight, and you can't do it. You have to practice from slow, going from lower weights up to the higher weights, and eventually you gain the strength to lift a 100-pound weight. So in the same way, I did this, and I found that in the beginning it vanished, but when I continued to do this exercise regularly every day, I could hold that image in my mind longer and longer. And to that extent, my mind was coming under my control. And I did this for many years, and it has helped me considerably in channeling the energy of anger, and also being able to control my mind and focus on things that I want to. Today, we will find that because we have no control over our mind is racing around in many different directions, even as we are sitting here listening to my talk. And to that extent, we are distracted, and we are not grasping everything that needs to be grasped. But if we had control over our mind, then if we were able to focus 100% of our attention to what's going on at this moment, then we would be much more efficient, and we would learn much more and achieve much more. So it helps in many different ways to be able to control your mind and focus on what is going on at that particular moment. So these are aspects of his philosophy, and that's the reason why he felt that anger was so important in a philosophy of nonviolence, is because nonviolence is not about fighting an enemy, it is about transforming a friend. And he realized that if we are looking to transform a friend, we can't transform that person with aggression or with angry remarks. We can transform that person only through love and respect. And love and respect means being able to control our anger and be able to, channel that energy into love and respect for people. And if we can achieve that, then we would be able to remove all the conflicts that we face in societies. We can, get rid of much of the violence that we experience in our lives. And all of that adds up to bringing peace in the world. A lot of people do talk about working for peace and doing things for peace to achieve peace in the world. But when I ask them what peace means to you, they are not able to give me a very cogent answer to that question. And that is because we really don't know what peace means. We assume that if we are not at war with somebody, we are living in peace. But that's not true. Because even when we are not at war with somebody, we have many conflicts in society, and we have not done anything to remove those conflicts there. And so peace is not the absence of war. To my mind, peace is achievable only when we can create harmony in society, when we can all live in harmony with each other, whatever our color, whatever our race, whatever our size, whatever our beliefs, wherever we come from, if we can only look at each other as human beings and respect each other as human beings, then we can live in peace and create peace around us. And this begins with the individual. It is with each one of us. When we change ourselves and our attitudes, the world will change. But if we are going to wait for somebody else to take the first step and change, nobody is going to do anything because everybody is waiting. So it's important that we become the change that we wish to see in the world. And it is through us that we can ultimately influence other people to change, and eventually change happens, and we can create that harmony in our society. Today, we don't have harmony in society, and especially here in the United States. In recent times, we have seen what's going on, and all the hate and the prejudice that is going on, and the resultant violence because of all that hate and prejudice. And it sometimes not just pains me, but it shocks me that a country that is so advanced that we can send instruments to Mars and explore other planets, and we can send people to the moon and all that, and yet we can't live as brothers and sisters in the country where we have so much hate and prejudice towards each other. It doesn't gel with me. It doesn't make any sense. If we can't live among ourselves, how are we ever going to be able to live with other people from other planets, if there are any people there? And how this, the whole question of many people thinking that they are going to migrate to Mars, if it's possible, and go and live there. We have made a mess of the world here and the earth here. And now we want to go and mess up the rest of the planets also. So we can't run away from the facts. We have to live here and learn to build a better society. And that is possible if we all make up our minds to achieve that. One of the important factors in the philosophy of nonviolence is also about building relationships. Our relationships today are very poor because we are so steeped in a materialistic lifestyle that materialism has taken control over our lives. And materialism and morality have an inverse relationship. When one increases, the other decreases. And we can see that in our everyday life. The more materialistic we are, the less moral we have become. So we have to find a balance between materialism and morality. And it is only when we find that balance that we will then be able to build better relationships with people there. So relationships should be built on the 4 principles of respect, understanding, acceptance, and appreciation. We have to respect ourselves and respect each other and respect our connection with all of creation. And that is very important, especially here, because we seem to think that we are independent individuals and we can do whatever we like and it's nobody's business. We are not independent individuals. We are interdependent, interconnected, and interrelated. And it's only when we respect that we will understand who we are and what we are and why are we here on earth. We are not here by accident. We are here to fulfill their purpose. And at the very least, the purpose for each one of us is to make this world a little better than we had found it when we were born. And if each one of us does that, then we can make this world a better place for human beings to live in. And when we understand that purpose in our lives, then we will be able to accept each other as human beings and not identify people by the labels we have put upon ourselves. Today, we have so many labels to identify people. We have national labels and race labels and color labels and economic labels and gender labels and philosophical labels and religious labels. You name it, then we have a label for it. And when we put a label on somebody, we are creating the potential for conflict because we are building a wall between that person and ourselves. And every time we build a wall between people, we are creating the potential for conflict and violence. So we have to remove all those labels and just look at each other as human beings and respect each other as human beings. And when we are able to do that, then we will be able to appreciate our own humanity. So these are some aspects of the philosophy of nonviolence that we have to learn and we can practice in our own lives. To begin with, learning how to deal with our anger in a more intelligent way, and then following that, learning how to build better relationships with between people. And if we do that, then we will be able to eliminate the violence that exists, not just the physical violence, but also the passive violence. Now, this is something that people don't know about and have not really paid much attention to because they've been focused so much on eliminating physical violence. And they've forgotten that each one of us practices passive violence all the time, every day in our lives. And passive violence is things like things that we do to one another, where we don't use any physical force, and yet we are able to hurt people directly or indirectly by our actions or inactions. Things like wasting resources, overconsumption of resources, throwing away things because we have so much of it. We have created a whole throwaway society where we can, something goes wrong, we just throw it away and go and buy a new one. We don't have any way of fixing it and using it over again. We throw away food, for instance. I read in the New York Times not long ago that in the United States alone, we throw away $160 billion worth of food every year. $160 billion worth of food goes into the garbage every year. And all of us do that. We are all guilty of it. But we don't realize that we are committing violence. Yet in our own country, there are millions of people who go to bed hungry every night. So poverty is the worst form of violence, and inducing poverty by wasting resources and over-consuming resources is even worse than that. So we have to become conscious of this. And grandfather made me conscious of the passive violence by making me draw a genealogical tree of violence. Just as we do a family tree with violence as the grandparent and physical violence and passive violence as the two branches. And every day before I went to bed, I had to analyze and examine everything that I had experienced during the day things that I may have done to other people or people may have done to me, or things that I may have thrown away or wasted. All of that had to be analyzed and put in their appropriate places on that tree. And when I began to do this introspection, I was amazed that within a few months, I was able to fill up a whole wall in my room with acts of passive violence. The physical violence didn't grow very much because there's a limit to what you can do physically. But the passive violence grew endlessly. And that is when grandfather explained to me the connection between the two. He said, we commit passive violence all the time, every day, consciously and unconsciously. And that generates anger in the victim. And the victim then resorts to physical violence to get justice. So it is passive violence that fuels the fire of physical violence. So logically, if we want to put out that fire of physical violence, we have to cut off the fuel supply. And since the fuel supply comes from each one of us, we have to become the change we wish to see in the world. So it is an individual choice. We have to make that commitment to make that change and work towards changing, and thereby change the world and make it a more peaceful and harmonious place for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Arun. I think maybe if people have questions, they could use the raise the hand thing. And I believe that will reshuffle folks. Oh, there's Brittany. Now I just lost Arun. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask? Because I've got something I want you to talk about, but we can get some questions first. Well, while people are thinking of a question, I do want to clarify one thing. I got a private message asking about Dr. Arun Gandhi's relationship to Salisbury University, and he's a senior practitioner in the center, but basically he's our spiritual guide. His family wrote the book, and we do work with students on campus. We teach classes, and more so we work with students and take students around the world. So I hope I answered that question. The person looks like you got in a little bit later than the beginning of the talk when I kind of mentioned those things. And we do work with graduate students. So here's your opportunity.
Maybe I didn't inspire anybody, I think.
No, Alejandro.
I'll say something. I'm
Okay.
inspired.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering where, you might have said this, but where do you live now?
In Rochester, New York.
Oh, right. Okay. So how do you find giving talks on Zoom with, an eighth of the people actually having their faces on camera and, having these like really kind of intimate conversation? I mean, I feel like it's very deep, and it must be hard to be doing this on the computer.
It is hard because I'm more of a people person. I like to see people. I like to interact with them. And when I'm giving a talk, my eyes are roaming the audience, and I see the reactions and so on, and it gives me more inspiration. So I miss that very much. This is so impersonal, sitting in front of a computer and speaking to a little gadget.
So we have, that's a decent question. And you know what? Over all these years, there's only been one time where I ever saw Arun use notes when he gave a lecture or a speech. And that's because I asked him to provide some statistics. But over the been decades, and it only happened once, it was at Salisbury. But I see Chuck White has a question he'd like to ask you, Arun.
Mhm.
Dr. Gandhi, thank you for your words of wisdom. This morning, I was thinking very deeply about the situation in Minnesota and worrying about what might happen if Derek Chauvin were acquitted of the crime that he committed. It turns out that he was convicted on all counts. But I wrote a piece about anger, about being angry, and how we all have the responsibility at one time or another to be angry. But we also have the responsibility to make sure that our anger is channeled appropriately. So I loved your words. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, I've been also concerned about this, especially the Black Lives Matter and so on. I see so much anger there, and I mean, it's justifiable to be angry because of what is going on, but it's not justifiable to use that anger negatively rather than constructively. And I think our whole justice system everywhere, we have created a culture of violence because of the materialism that we practice. And materialism needs to be protected, so we need security and so on. And one thing leads to another. And now we have created a whole culture of violence that has seeped so deeply in our lives that it's taken over every aspect of our life. Our sports, our entertainment, our religion, our politics, everything has become violent. And in that culture of violence, we cannot find an intelligent solution to problems. Now, like the problem with the African American people, the reason why, after 70 odd years of civil rights legislation, we are still nowhere near reaching integration or accepting or respecting each other. And that is because on both sides, we have relied heavily on just the law. The law can only enable people to enjoy the benefits that they want. But there is no law that can force one person to respect the other person if they don't want to. And that is where we are stuck. The African Americans have the ability to enjoy all the benefits there, but there is no respect on either side for each other. And as long as we don't have that respect for each other, we are not ever going to be able to get legislation to make that possible.
Arun.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Bruce Cord. How are you?
Good.
Good, good. I want to preface my question to you by just saying that my son Alex and I were privileged to have traveled with Dr. Polkinghorne and Dr. Gandhi and Tushar Gandhi to India. We left January 1st of 2020 and we came back, January 20th. And it was the trip of a lifetime and a real eye opener. And I'm so glad to have been on the trip and to have shared it with my adult son. So thank you for that. And if anybody ever has the opportunity to take such a trip, I would heartily recommend it.
Thank you.
It was, my son and I are still talking about it. It was really just it was in many ways a life-changing experience for us.
Mm.
So here's my question for you. Social media is a relatively new phenomenon. When your grandfather was in the process of changing India.
Mm.
Social media didn't exist, but there were other methods of communication. But with social media being so instant today, and we have leaders, former presidents of the United States, that espouse hatred, violence in social media, how do we stop spinning out of control? I mean, we all need, as you said, to have a role in repairing the world. But when we have such forces of authority figures that seem to go out of their way to go in a totally negative direction, what do we do?
Well, I think, we are partly to blame for this because we give them all the power because we don't want to be bothered with all that. And, we think that we can give them the power to do whatever they like and they should do it. So now we have come to the stage when we think of the politicians as a separate tribe who are born to rule over people. I think it's time that the people, our founding fathers had said that we need a government for the people, by the people, of the people. And we don't have that. We have a government for the powerful and the rich and by the rich, and so we have given our power away and we need to take it back. To put it in a very crude way, I think, in many ways, we are like a herd of sheep who are willing to follow the herdsman wherever he takes us. And we hope that he takes us to greener pastures. But sometimes he ends up taking us to the slaughterhouse. And it's too late before we realize that. So it's if we take back that power and take back our responsibility. And that's another thing that really bothers me a lot is, we are so focused on our rights and we have a Bill of Rights and we must have our rights and enjoy our rights. But nobody has ever talked about our responsibilities. Rights and responsibilities are two sides of the same coin. If you're not willing to shoulder your responsibility, you can't really enjoy the rights. So we need to have a bill of responsibilities along with the Bill of Rights if we want to put it all down in black and white. But otherwise, it's our responsibility that we are part of a community and we need to work towards building that community, not just building ourselves, that we have to always be conscious of what's going on around us, what is going on in our capital, what are the politicians doing in our name. They are not our leaders. They are here to serve us. So, as long as we remain passive and quiet and give them the power to do whatever they want to do, they are going to exploit us because we have created, and again, going back to that materialistic society, materialism thrives on exploitation. We have to exploit everything, exploit people, exploit resources, exploit money, environment, everything to make a profit. And in that kind of exploitation, they have the power to exploit us more and they go ahead and do it.
Well, in our system, where we have three branches of government and checks and balances, I personally feel that because Congress has been so ineffective, that we effectively have an imperial presidency, because through the executive order, the president does basically what he sees fit. And then the Supreme Court is the final check on presidential power. But
well, that's what you get in a two-party system.
Mhm.
When you have a two-party system and two parties are fighting against each other, nothing really happens. And so if you have a multi-party system, there is a possibility of some action being taken and some action being achieved. But again, it's a question of, we have, politics is no longer a friendly give and take. I remember in my own time here in the United States, 30, 40 years ago, politicians from both sides would fight like cats and dogs in the Congress, but they would come out from there and they would be wonderful friends and party together and go out together and be very good friends and so on. Now they're enemies. They don't want to look at each other's faces.
Mhm.
and
Yeah, right.
that needs to end. They need to set an example.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the things is we have a couple of other folks that have been waiting to ask a question, but one of the things to think about is how, on what time frame, what horizon do we make decisions? And a lot of politicians make decisions based on the next election, whereas you've got leaders of institutions that make decisions that are further out and I would say more ethical. So you have to ask the question of what game you're playing and what are the rules and how the rules are changing. But Alejandro from Mexico and Carla have had their hands up for quite some time. So if it's okay, we'll switch over to those guys. Who wants to go first?
Carla, you go first.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you to both the staff of Boserman Center and Dr. for having this event. It's been really helpful to hear Dr. Gandhi. There are many things that are relatable, even though we have many cultural differences and political differences between both the United States, India, and Mexico. However, my question should be, what would you think is the greatest obstacle or challenge when transcending this anger, individual anger, into opportunity of creating change in the public?
Well, it is something that we have to work on all our lives. It's not something that you can learn in a week or a month and practice a little. It's something I have been doing it all my life, ever since I learned from my grandfather, and do it because life changes and the challenges keep changing. And so, our response to various conflicts and challenges also has to take another way. So we have to be, abreast of all of this, and we have to be conscious and continue to learn and control our minds every day.
Oh, thank you, Doctor. Now, I would like to preface my question quickly. We have seen that our society has thrived over information, but we also have seen the rise of fake news and misinformation. By citing what you said, we have seen that fake news can be a form of passive violence, and we need truth to become again a force for change. How can we push the fight, in lack of a better word, for truth against such a destructive force like is misinformation and fake news?
Well, we're going through a kind of birthing period with this social media being so new, and everybody is so excited about it and using it and misusing it in some way or the other all the time. So I think we will ultimately plateau and reach a stage when, things will be a little more um, uh, sane, for instance. But in the meanwhile, it's again our responsibility to be conscious and to do things with responsibility that, we help society instead of harm society through our social media or postings. You mentioned truth. We have to be also aware of the fact that truth appears differently to different people. What is true to me may not be true to you, and what is true to you may not be true to somebody else. So we should have that open mind to accept that and ultimately search for the absolute truths. And if we do it with understanding and consciousness, we can achieve that goal. Now, a good example of this is our religion. Each religion has a very different concept of God, and they believe that that is the only truth, and they hang on to that. But really, nobody knows what God is and what form God takes, and what is that power. So if we all come together, we can share our experiences and try truthfully to come to an understanding of what that power of Almighty is. And maybe in our lifetime we will not achieve it, but at least we would have made that attempt, honest attempt to achieve it. But if we don't do that, then we live as we are doing today, with each one bringing down the other and trying to demean the other and creating more conflicts.
Thank you so much.
Jared, do you want to go? And then Deanna and Tina, want to go in that order?
Yeah, I'm okay with that if everyone else is. It seems like it. Hi, Dr. Arun. I'm a little nervous, but so my question is, how do we work for peace against a system that is funded by conflict and war? It feels like it's been built to suppress and oppress individuals trying to work together and organize for that very change. Yet it seems like it's somewhat fruitless when it comes to consequences of people working for that change.
Well, we have to support each other and bring about that change. While changing ourselves, we have to help other people change their attitudes too. But we, again, going back to the analogy I gave earlier, where we have given politicians all the power to do whatever they like, and they make enemies and they commit us and our nations to fighting wars and so on. And when we look at it, we really don't know what the truth in that fight and the war is. We are just submitting to what the politicians tell us and believe in them. And it's not always true. They do things many times for their own political gains. So as citizens of the country, we need to be more conscious, need to be more aware, need to be more responsible and make the politicians realize that they are not our leaders, but they are working for us and taking care of our country because we have given them the right to do that. So unless we do that and unless we become more active in these things, we are going to be like sheep just being herded around either to greener pastures or to the slaughterhouse.
Hi, Dr. Gandhi.
Hi.
My name's Annabella. I'm visiting Deanna. And you mentioned labels being that they can be walls. And I feel like they're a product of us being in a really individualistic society.
Mm.
And I struggle with labels a lot in my mind because sometimes I think that they're so identity driven and they hold us back from like this concept of oneness. And then on another front, I feel like they're necessary for like the oppressed, especially within a super individualistic society like our own. So I guess I'm wondering, like, how can somebody grapple with the concept of labels in a healthier way, or rather like how can we work towards a more collective society, or like how can our society become more collective?
Well, I think when we look at people who are suffering, not as the Black people or the African American people or the Indian people or the others, but as human beings who are suffering and we need to do something to help them, then we will be more inclusive. But when we, follow our labels and we say, well, we are only going to work for this group of people or that group of people and not for the other group of people, then, we are creating the potential for conflict.
Okay. Tina, did you have a question?
Thank you.
If
Thank you. Sorry about that, Brian. Hi,
Okay.
everyone. Thank you, Dr. Gandhi, for this lecture. This is giving me pause to think about some of what I've been struggling with is the threat of violence in protest. And what I see is people becoming confused or just simply not caring about the difference between protesting and rioting, and the threat of violence influencing decisions being made, and the negative ramifications of that down the road, because there will be another Chauvin case, and there are coming down the pipeline. I'm just wondering, in terms of how do we build some type of reform when there does not appear to be respect for law enforcement? You mentioned the importance of mutual respect. And although I've tried to do that in my social media to try to present both views, that everyone ultimately wants to be able to leave whatever traffic stop alive, rather that be it you're going to be detained or sent off with a ticket. But that law enforcement officer too has a right to be able to go on another service call, live to go on another service call, or go home that night. And I don't see, based on some of the feedback I get, that piece is there, the understanding that law enforcement too has a right to survive these encounters. So how do you, if they talk so much about reform, but everyone has to have a seat to the table, you can't create change when one of the key participants who are part of the problem are not included in any type of solution. So what is the best way for any type of reform, any talk of reform to really get started? How do we get everyone to the table and understanding that that's a necessity? Because it doesn't seem to be important to some of the people that I've spoken with. They don't seem to see law enforcement as even human beings. And I don't see any respect whatsoever.
Yeah, there is, like I said earlier, Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I just had myself, I didn't start my video because I'm kind of recovering from COVID and wasn't, I just,
Okay.
I'll go ahead and start my video so you can see me.
Tina, can you mute it?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Can
Yeah,
you
I
go ahead
can
and
hear
mute?
you,
Okay.
but I would like to see you.
Tina,
I
can you
thought
mute?
so. Howdy there.
Hey.
Yeah. So what I was saying is that, you know, as I said earlier, that we are so deeply rooted in the culture of violence that everything about us has become violent. And even our justice system is violent. So when people talk about wanting justice, they're not interested in justice for reforming and resolving the problem. They're more interested in justice as revenge. We want eye for an eye justice. Somebody has to pay for what they have done. And that is not really justice. I mean, today we found Cohen guilty and he'll pay for it. He'll probably go in prison and pay for it there. But when you look at it, it's not really justice. I mean, you know, what good is it going to do? He's going to be, he probably come out from there more bitter than ever because his life was ruined. And so we need to transform the difference between the culture of violence and the culture of non-violence. Is that in culture of violence, we are seeking revenge. In a culture of non-violence, we are seeking transformation. And in transformation, we are focusing on the problem rather than the person.
Mm-hmm.
And when you focus on the problem and try to find a solution to the problem, then you bring both the parties or all the parties together in trying to resolve the problem in an equitable way. And so as long as we live in a culture of violence, we are always going to be faced with this problem.
Okay. Oh, Tina, we put you on mute, so we didn't get the feedback. But did he answer your question? Okay. Whew. I can't believe this. We have Alejandro and Will Merlo wanting to ask questions. And just the reason I'm saying that so everyone else knows, on my screen, the top row is what we call the Gandhi gang. I see Hannah and Robin and some other things. And Cynthia, when we were in India, we got tattoos. Remember that, Alejandro?
Yeah, we did.
And Bruce, we got these tattoos that says Gandhi gang on it because we're part of the Gandhi gang. So go ahead. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Good to see everyone that was part of the trip.
Hi.
So hi, Dr. Gandhi. How you doing today?
Good.
So glad to see you. And it's really refreshing to hear your words again. It was a wonderful experience, I think, for everyone that was part of the trip. But I speak for myself when I say it was life-changing. So it's always good to hear from you. I have 2 questions.
Mm.
They may be slightly unrelated to what you said, but I was reading something about India in the past few hours about how they were able to get all these vaccines prepped up for the world, and then they're the #1 distributed in the world, but they don't have enough vaccines for the people in India. I would just wanted to ask if you know how is Modi handling all the situation with COVID-19 in India.
Well, he's just being a typical politician and trying to. His eyes are on on the power base and the votes, and so he'll do anything that brings him votes. He won't do things because that is the right thing to do. And, I mean, he wanted to create an international image for himself. And so he started distributing the vaccine outside in the African countries instead of in his own country. And then when he got the backlash for it and people started rebelling against it, he recently stopped the export of the vaccines, and now he is using it more for the people themselves. But as you know, in India, there are, so many people, more than a billion and 200 million people there, and many of them are in abject poverty. And so dealing with all of them and making it possible to give these vaccines to all of them is going to be difficult. And then especially because we have like our Trumpers here, we have Trumpers there also. People, right-wing people who believe that they don't need any vaccine, that God protects them. And so millions of them went to the Kumbh Mela recently in Allahabad and participated in that. And now that is going to increase the spread of the pandemic more. So, you have to deal with all of these issues. And when we have divided people and we have divided loyalties, we're going to have more difficulties.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, we were able to witness a couple of the incidents when we were there, but yeah, I think it's quite the task for the vaccine to go around. The other question that I wanted to ask you is if you guys are, once the time is right, you guys are resuming activities. I know we were talking about planning a trip to South Africa, and I was still interested in that. So if you have any news about it, or
well, I'm waiting until this pandemic is over. Right now, South Africa and India are both in pretty bad condition, and so no travel is permitted in that area. So if things improve and we come back to normal, and if I'm still alive and healthy,
You will be.
Who knows? Now 87. I don't know.
Hey, you look great. And you know what? As a matter of fact, we have a lot of people on this call who've known you for years, like Mike and Will, do you remember when Will introduced you years ago and he said, look at those guns on Gandhi? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Will was one of our undergraduate students from maybe 10 years ago. And he goes, yeah, Dr. Gandhi's doing spinning and look at those guns. Real Gandhianism. Speaking of which, Alejandro, can we switch over to Will, or have you finished what you wanted to ask?
I finished.
Okay. Will, Merlo.
Hey, how are you, Dr. Gandhi?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. First and foremost, I'm really happy that I joined today because it was a refresher course, in a sense, for me, in terms of nonviolent communication and the passive and active violence, and the tree that you allude to so many times. And more than anything, I just wanted to thank you because it helped me today. It reframed once again, every single time I hear the story or I recount the story to myself, or not the story, but the points, it helps me see how I can see things in life as active or passive violence. And in my passive violence, I recognize that these tiny, minute pieces or moments are in fact passive violence. Like before the call, I'm embarrassed to say I was smoking a cigarette. And when you were talking about passive violence, I thought to myself, well, if I think of even a cigarette as a passive violence against myself, then maybe that's a
You're
small
right.
change that I can make for myself. To put a minute example or a small example. And I think, my question was going to be to ask you to talk more about how it's a gift, but I think that's the gift in itself, is how we can individually make small changes, whether that's how we communicate, or how we deal with stress at work, or so on and so forth. So more than anything, I just wanted to say thanks.
You're welcome.
And thanks again for another wonderful lecture. And you might be 87, but you're one of the most healthy 87-year-olds I've ever met. So I'm looking forward to seeing you for a long time forward.
Hey,
Yeah.
just as a disclaimer, Will Merlo, I remember Arun and I had to go down and try and, where were we? Port-au-Prince, Haiti, to try and talk Will into coming back to university to finish his degree, because he went out on got inspired by Gandhi and went down for one week, which lasted then a whole summer, which lasted an entire year.
No, which lasted 2 years.
Yeah, well, then it kept going. But the thing is, it got longer and longer, to the point where people were going like, is this guy going to come back? And Arun and I went down, and I could see why you stayed. Your heart was in the right place, but I think the connection that you have from that not only was from the people of Haiti, but from your interaction with Arun. I could see how it's rubbed off.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I remember when we were driving once, there was a Gandhi Center for Nonviolence, for Peace and Nonviolence, that we saw on the road, and it was like this nook and cranny of a place, right when we were going to a place called, I think, Viva Rio or something, and it was on the left, and all of a sudden we look over and there's a sign, and it made me realize, how important the work that Arun continues is, that even in this tiny remote place, they got the message.
Yeah. At first, I thought you were talking about India. You're talking about Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
Yeah, it was.
Port-au-Prince. You know what? There's a couple of things, and I would like to say, and then we're going to go to Palevy. But Gandhi said a lot of things. He was a prolific writer, and he ran newspapers and wrote lots of books and whatnot. So you can quote him on a whole bunch of stuff. But one thing he did say is, people will follow me in life and revere me in death, but no one will let my cause theirs. And we know that's not true, because we got Arun. And we have other people who have taken that to heart. It's not a philosophy, it's a way of life. And we're just really spoiled and super fortunate to have Arun part of our gang. We're part of his gang, I should say. But I see, I don't know if I'm reading this right. Would you like to ask a question? Yes, go ahead. I think you're on mute. Okay.
Yeah. Hello, Dr. Gandhi.
Hello.
I'm Patricia. I thought about what you said about justice and your remark about Chauvin going to prison and what does that do? My thinking, which is part of my question, is that you have to deal with the reality that exists. And yes, you're right. We all have responsibility to make things better, to have a better world. But I think that we also have to look at perpetrators who also have a responsibility. And if they don't take their responsibility and harm people, then, you teach your children that there are consequences. And I guess in the extreme, I'm thinking about Hitler. So with the Holocaust. So I'm thinking that a one-size-fits-all application of nonviolence in all situations at all levels My question is how can that work? How does that apply to the reality?
Well, I think the way it can be done is by recognizing the fact that we are living in a culture of violence. And as I said over and over again, that the culture of violence has taken over every aspect of our lives. Our relationships and everything is based on violence. So what I see in this situation with Corbyn, and I'm not supporting what he did, or I'm not happy of what he did. I mean, he did something awful, but what we need to look at is why was he made, why was he, what made him do that? What was it in his life that made him do that? What was it in his life that made him hate Black people, if that is what caused it? Or why is the police force trained in that way of using violence instead of, in every case that I have seen, there are 3 or 4 police officers trying to arrest one Black man, and they can't do it, and they have to use the gun to shoot the person and kill them. Why have we created that kind of a situation? And unless we focus on that, we are going to have these problems over and over again. It is going to go on. There'll be another one tomorrow, and so on, and it goes on. So we have to, at some stage, stop and think of what can we do to make this world a better place. Now, you brought up the question of the Holocaust and Hitler, and I know at that moment, perhaps nobody thought of it, and maybe nothing could have been done non-violently with Hitler. But when we look at it today, in retrospect, we sacrificed 60 million human lives to get rid of Hitler. We got rid of Hitler, but we didn't get rid of his philosophy. His philosophy of hate and prejudice still continues all over the world. Even in Germany and in every country in the world, we have hate and prejudice still going on. So what did we sacrifice 60 million human beings for if we were not able to get rid of that hate and prejudice?
We did not. We did not sacrifice.
No, I mean the word sacrifice. We fought a world war, and 60 million human lives were sacrificed there. And so I'm not saying we as Americans, we went into the war much later, and so our casualties were less there. But generally, the world, 60 million human beings died in World War II. And what was that sacrifice for if we were not able to get rid of the hate and prejudice? And that is what we do all the time. Now today, Chauvin is bad and a bad police officer, and he has to be arrested and put in prison. But the whole system is bad, and they keep creating this kind of bad police officers. And I think one of the things that I have been concerned about lately, and it's that the police, we refer to them as law enforcement officers. They are not protecting the citizens. They are there to enforce the law. There's a different mindset in the whole thing. In my mind, a police is supposed to be there to protect the citizens, to see that the citizens can live peacefully without fear of violence. But instead of that, they're there only to enforce the law, not to protect the citizens.
Okay, Arun, there's a couple things. I've been getting a whole bunch of text messages. Just so you know, we've got people from 22 countries that have been on listening to you, which I guess that's one of the ups of Zoom. Typically, we just fill up a room on campus, which I think is kind of interesting. Yeah. Excuse me, I've been corrected, 24 countries. In fact, I see some people from East Africa on now too, and from throughout Europe. But one of the things we could maybe do in the future, and we could have more of these chats and whatnot, is thinking about next year if we have a class on campus, maybe April 14th next year, we can have another birthday party for you. 88.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, we had what was it, 80th birthday party for you, where we had the crabs in the garage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just so you know how much Arun Gandhi loves Salisbury University and his students, you're his kids. He's allergic to crabs. and we're on the Eastern Shore and we eat crabs here. And the rule was, if you want to talk to Dr. Gandhi and he's sitting at the other end of the table by himself, you had to wash your hands and all that sort of stuff. And we had an EpiPen. I know there were some people that were at this thing, but maybe what we can do is find something a little less dangerous. And we'll have a class next year here and invite everyone to come see you and do it in person. Because I know how you are a people person. And even though this is intimate to some degree, it's no substitution for the real thing. But if we don't have, Odie on. Odie, I see we have a hand raised. Arun, do you have time for one or two more questions?
Okay.
Okay, this is Odie, an identical twin from Nigeria. Odie, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Hello, Odie.
Dr. Gandhi, thank you so much for a great speech and a presentation. It's an honor to hear you again. I enjoyed your presentations many years ago when I was a graduate student at Salisbury University, some 5-6 years ago. It's good to hear you again now. The entire movement of concepts as it is this today of nonviolent resistance or civil disobedience or whatever nomenclature it bears now hinges largely on your grandfather's assumption that even the most powerful cannot rule without the consent of the ruled. And looking at the world today and in looking at power, really, the people's power, which is a fundamental concept when it comes to nonviolence. Our present day, with the new laws of surveillance, suspension of privacy rights, and all that is going on right now, those in my thinking, my interpretation is stripping the people of their power. Now, if the people's power is being diminished by the suspension of their privacy rights, of their personal rights, my question is how effective or how practical is that phrase or that assumption in our present day world, given the fact that the people power is being diminished by new laws, and it seems to me that the trend is changing. The political power is increasing. The system of democracy today seems to be getting a little twist, in the sense that it's becoming more dictatorial, if I may put it that way. So how do we operationalize that assumption given the present practice of suspension of human rights and privacy rights?
Well, like I said earlier, we have become sheep, and we have absolved our power and given it away to the politicians. So we have to become more active and more assertive. And if something is going in a different way, we have to make the politicians realize that they are doing the wrong thing and we are not going to submit to it. Grandfather said that no one can oppress you more than you oppress yourself. And when we submit to oppression, when we submit to all of these things that we know is wrong, then we can't blame anybody else, because we have given up our responsibilities and handed over everything to politicians. So unless we get up and become more assertive and more active in our future, we are going to see this happening all the time. Our power is eroded, and the politicians become more powerful, and they use the political, the state power and everything that they have in their power to keep us subjugated. So, it's the people have to be more awake.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Good to hear your voice, Odie. Let's see, a couple things. Thursday, April 14th, next year is a Thursday. So how about if we have a birthday party on the 15th at the center, and everyone who's here is invited. And if you can make it, great. If not, we'll Zoom, beam you in by Zoom, but we'll have a get together in a year. See how the world's changed since then, and what we've all done in the interim to be the change we wish to see in the world. And I want to end on that, if it's okay with you, Arun.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people out there with that logo, and it's on bumper stickers and coffee mugs and posters and billboards and whatnot. But be the change you wish to see in the world is attributed to Arun's grandfather, the Mahatma. And in fact, when you go looking for the origins of it, which a New York Times journalist did, he came to the conclusion where he found it first being spoken was at, I think it was Christian Brothers University in Memphis, Tennessee. Does that sound right, Arun?
Yeah.
In the early 1980s. And Arun had given a quote from his grandfather, and somebody in the audience asked, generally speaking, Dr. Gandhi, what does that mean? And he goes, I think what my grandfather was trying to say is, be the change you wish to see in the world. So when you know it's Gandhi, just make sure you put Arun in front of it, so you know it's our Gandhi. and it's nice that some people end their letters and their conversations with simply the word be, because you can figure out the rest of the sentence from there. Be the change you wish to see. And Arun, we love you. We really appreciate the opportunity to be able to spend some time with you. Like I said, we're really spoiled with your wisdom and good humor, and you are looking good. And especially those of us who've seen you over time, right, Mike? Doesn't Arun look fantastic?
Looks like a young man.
I know. You just like, what? This is so unfair.
By the way, we love you, Arun. This is my wife.
Thank you. I love you too. Hey.
And everyone be safe and be okay. We'll catch up.
Yeah.
Arun, I'll catch up with you a little later on. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Tom's message.